Okay. Claudia, 10 seconds. You said you were afraid, now you're brave.
Yeah, no, pretty much I was just saying I had a lot of the same concerns or insecurities. I feel like the physicians walked us through their own experience and they would tell us like their own challenges. So whether that's like having confidence in yourself and the decisions you make and like speaking up and whatnot, I think that was all really beneficial to hear. And it just like makes you feel like these mentors or people you look up to are human. And they got through it. And I think that we're all really capable here and we're all taking the extra steps by being here. So I just think it made me a lot more confident in myself. And I think that's something that our group talked about. Sorry, that was 20 seconds.
Thank you. Next are my jams.
One of the anxieties that I have is that I guess like the path of becoming a doctor and how long and how many years it takes. And I also, or before, I really feel like that I only need to choose, or if I choose to become a doctor, that is what I need only in my life, or that's what I'll have only. But from the speakers we had, they also have like families, they also do other stuff aside from being a doctor. So that kind of, they helped me realize that it is possible to do a lot of things too, even if you're a doctor.
Great point. Who's next? So I walk back to my desk.
I feel like one of the anxieties I had was I was kind of thinking that I had to do so many things at once, from volunteering, shadowing. And so it was kind of nice to hear that other mentors said that you don't have to be overwhelmed or try to do everything all at once, and to just take your time and go with the process.
Thank you, Samaya. Is that it for your group?
Sorry, I'm in the car still, so
oh, great.
I think something that I was kind of scared of was I always felt like I was a little behind, or that I'm not taking or doing the same things that a lot of the people around me are in the pre-med pathway. And I like being in competitive settings within like class all the time can get a little like scary, or like not scary, like stressful. And that's what I was a little afraid of, just feeling like I wasn't doing enough, or like I'm still being competed against, or not competed against, but like, I don't know if that makes sense, but always being like the competition feeling. But I don't know, after joining virtual rounds and like listening to the doctors talk, and like none of them had like the same exact like experience in their pre-med years, or like none of them really took the same pathway. So now I feel like a little better.
Thank you. Anything else from that group? Any last thoughts from that group? We'll have more time for you guys to add to those insightful comments. So let's go on though to Emerald Doctors.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. I'm in the bus, so I have the same feeling as Monica. Like at first, like I was so nervous. Like I know like medical school requires a lot of things, especially like when you have a kid and like a family and responsibilities. It's like kind of like anxiety that brings to me, and so I was so nervous at first. But this, I mean, the virtual round program helped me a lot because I have learned a lot of things from the physicians, from their journey, experiences, their challenge, difficulties that they through. That I can do that too, like the way that they do it, so it's possible. So I would say it was helpful, and I learned a lot of things, and I'm okay now, and I'm surviving. So.
I'm glad that we're starting to touch on, I think, a topic that's really important, which is balancing family and medicine. Almost all of you are women, and many of you have spoken to in your reflections to the experience of being a woman in medicine. So glad to hear those reflections. Okay, who's next in Emerald Doctors?
Yeah, for me, I don't have any family members or know anybody that is a physician. So I feel like I've been discouraged many times in the past because of setbacks or events. But listening to physicians or clinicians here has made me feel more encouraged and more motivated, especially hearing their challenges, their own setbacks. You know, some physicians have had to reapply or retake their MCAT. And so they've continuously mentioned the importance of persevering and building resilience. And obviously they've become very successful physicians. So I've really appreciated that.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki.
I can go. I think for me, it was a little more personal. Being able to speak up in a bigger group, even in our small groups, for me, it's important for me to show my personality. And so sometimes it doesn't really come through because I get afraid that people may think it's a little too much, or I'm too all over the place to be a doctor. You know, you have to be like this perfect person to be a doctor. And so I'm just glad that was sort of taken away, and that I was able to connect with my peers as well.
Can you comment on specifically how it felt to be in a group of women who were going into medicine?
It's just nice to see other women that are doing such cool things. Like some people in my group are doing research and they're doing these really cool majors, or they graduated with really cool majors. And it's just, you know, they've already gotten through that step. They're studying for their MCATs, and you know, they're taking that initiative. And so it's just really nice to see.
Thank you. Who's next from Emerald Doctors?
Hello. Yeah, just the whole process of the practice of medicine. It's a long journey. There's lots of challenges. And I'm at that point in my life where the MCAT and getting accepted in medical school. You know, just think about it. You want to do good on a test. So, and that can give you anxiety. You know, just got to be mentally prepared. So that's what I'm doing. And I appreciate everyone's story that they shared. It is a process and everybody goes at their own pace. So appreciate that. And I always thought I might be a family medicine doctor, but I have developed a new interest from this virtual rounds. A hospitalist, I think that goes in line more of my goals that I want to achieve in life. And yeah, so it's so far so good.
You haven't heard from Dr. Singh yet, so I'm sure he's hoping that I haven't won you over to the dark side. Did you want to jump in here, Dr. Singh?
I guess I like to keep patients out of the hospital. What can I say?
A little bit of competition between specialties is always good. Next, anyone else in Emerald Doctors?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's been mostly very inspiring, because I did have my doubts, and I think I still do just a little, because I haven't been able to find an international student that it's a doctor yet. But I know they're not very common, and I know that is a drawback that I have to face. But I think seeing so many like different paths that people are taking to apply to medical school, and then also seeing the physicians that there's just plenty of things that you can do within medicine. I think the MD path is still for me, and I am very passionate about it. But I know if it doesn't work out, I still can be part of the healthcare system somehow.
Don't give up on us. Next. Thank you, Michaela. There are a lot of international medical graduates who are in medicine, and the fact that we didn't have any is just our fault, and we can definitely think about that in the future. Is that it for intramural doctors? Because if so, we can go on to future healthcare leaders.
I'm sorry, I came a little bit late, but
Oh no, it's okay. Are you
was
my
the-
jams or emerald doctors?
Emerald Doctors.
All right, welcome, Lydia the King.
Sorry, what was the question? The first.
Yeah, what are some of the fears or anxieties you had entering VR, and how are you feeling now? And if people have spoken to that, an alternate could be, what are some of the key takeaways that you've had from these sessions?
Let's see, fear or anxieties. I don't know. I think joining virtual rounds, I think would be really, and I thought was going to be very informative, and it has been. It was actually a little more informative than I thought it was going to be. I liked learning about different resources for people that were in medicine, and even in the PH group, people that were interested in topics of public health. Just, I guess, learning about the experiences of other doctors that are in different specialties was really interesting. I think I still probably will do primary care, maybe obstetrics. It's not as likely, but being a hospitalist sounded interesting. It's something to consider, but I still think I'd probably prefer primary care, where I think somebody said prevention is better. And that's the side I'm kind of on, because once you get admitted, things get really, really hard. Depending on your condition, I should say. But let's see, fear and anxieties. I think I still am kind of worried about being a non-traditional student when it comes to getting into a university. I know you're supposed to have a lot of choices. Well, you're supposed to plan to apply to a lot of schools when it comes to medical school, but for me, UW Med is still like my primary choice, mainly because this is where my family is, and the fact that it's a good school is just a plus for me. But I don't know, as a non-traditional student, it doesn't feel like I guess fit the mold to be like a competitive student, if that makes sense. I think somebody mentioned the other day that they're like a 6-year grad, and that was me. I'm a 6-year grad, but I mean, to me, it's like important that you just kind of like make it happen. And that was the most important thing. I was able to make that happen, and I'm moving on to the next step. So anything else? I can't think. What did you say the alternative was? Because I forgot. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll have to move quickly, but what are some of the key takeaways?
Key takeaways. I think somebody already mentioned it's possible to be in medicine, even if you have like, I guess, a path that's divergent from what's expected. So.
Thank you. So anyone else from this group, from Emerald Doctors? Before we move on to, let's go on to future healthcare leaders.
I think a takeaway for me would just be being able to listen to like the ups and down like experiences that these physicians had. That it's okay to, not make medical school the first try or things like that. It was really nice to hear and like gave me hope, I guess. So yeah.
Thanks, Marissa. Were you anxious about that when you first came in then?
Yeah, I think I was just like anxious about if I'm like, I don't know what I needed, the types of things I needed to do to get into medical school and like other opportunities I should be taking. So it was nice to hear what other physicians did to help them be a more competitive applicant.
And I just want to brag. I told you guys I like to brag. I just wanted to brag because Marissa's last name is such an important last name in Mexican history. Does everybody know why? Everyone know Vicente Guerrero? Is that like an ancestor of yours by chance, Marissa?
I'm sorry?
Vicente Guerrero?
Um,
He was a president. He was the second president of Mexico. And
who that is.
huh?
I don't know who that
Oh,
is.
okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw your name and I was like, he was a black president of Mexico in like the 1850s.
Yeah. My dad's from Guam, so that's what.
Oh, okay. Too bad. Okay. Who is next in future healthcare leaders? That's right, Marissa. You're from both places. You're from Guam and you're Latino both.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. Okay, future healthcare leaders. Others.
For me, it was kind of just like the worry of like I've kind of like I know I want to be like in the medical field, but I never really had any like been drawn to anything specific or wanted to do anything specific. But I think it was Dr. Chin. I was the nocturnist, and that like really drew me in because I know I want to have like a big family, and knowing that like I can still like do what I want and help people and like be in like the medical field, but still like have time for family and everything really like helped push me towards sticking with it because I wasn't always super sure about it.
Wonderful. Anyone else from future healthcare leaders? Thank you,
I can go
Jordan.
next.
Please, Jessica.
As far as like fears and anxieties, like just an overall one that I had was just feeling disadvantaged, like just already. Because I'm also a non-traditional student and I don't have family members that are doctors. I don't have like a mentor that's a doctor or anything like that. And so I feel a fear that I have is that I'm missing out on like insider information. And so I also like could be missing out on opportunities that I'm just not aware of because I don't have anyone that knows about these things. And a way that the program has helped is it's gotten me, I guess, like in contact with doctors. So I can always like email them and like ask them questions, and everyone has seemed to be very kind and accommodating. So
Thanks for saying that, Jessica. And I hope you do feel like an insider. And you brought up one point that I did want to get to at some point today, which is that now that you've done this program, we are exploring how to get you, each and every one of you a mentor going forward. We're figuring out that, but we're essentially only opening up mentoring to people who've gone through at least one of our programs, VR and or iHuman. So, you'll be first on the list.
that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for your hard work and your, your dedication to this field. So who else from future healthcare leaders?
I can go next. So one of my fears was I felt like other peers in this group, I guess just comparing myself to like at what level, because this is like the first time that I'm doing like shadowing, but it's not like in what I'm trying to be in the career of, but this helped me a lot because it helped me with like keeping more open mind of what career paths I could take in healthcare besides dental. And I guess also with the comparing thing, like I was just thinking, I was like, oh, there's going to be other students that probably have like so many hours of shadowing and volunteer work. And then like hearing from like the physicians, I guess it like helps me know that there's gonna always be people who are not at the same level as you, or like they're taking different pathways, which is like helpful because then I know that I'm not like the only one going through it.
Thank you. And I just want to state the obvious. Esmeralda, did you and Jordan realize your connection? You're both at SPU, am I right?
No, that's me and Samaya.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I go to PLU.
You go to PLU, okay.
Yeah.
But there's also a dental connection there too. So Esmeralda, if you are interested in dentistry, we might be sending you to Jordan's dad.
That would be great. I really liked his presentation.
Who's next? I think is that it? If so, so does that group have any other thoughts, future healthcare leaders, takeaways? And if not, does anyone in the whole group have any thoughts or takeaways? And while you're thinking, just a way I like to often end meetings is takeaways, pluses, and deltas. So, you know, we'll try that this time, just at the very end. You know, we'll try to leave a few minutes for just what you took away from today, what went well, and then you know, what would you change either from today's session or from the sessions as a whole. And we really do need that, because this is a program that is being built on the shoulders of everyone participating and collaborating, whether students or speakers. All of us are literally working together to create something new, and therefore you have to kind of bear the brunt of being like the oldest kid, who your parents kind of practice on. So don't be mean to your younger siblings who come after you by like failing to tell us what we can be doing. Oh, Hytham, I just saw you there. We didn't get you. Failing to tell us what we can do better. Hytham, did you what group were you in?
Future healthcare leaders.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed you. Please, what were some fears and anxieties you had entering VR, and how are you feeling?
It was all the stuff was basically previously covered. But one thing that I just wanted to add was like the fact that in a lot of in medicine and in healthcare, whenever like or I'm pretty sure everyone else in this meeting walk into a room, you're gonna be like the only person like you in that room. And I don't know, it kind of feels weird. And then you're also looked at differently. So I don't know. I went to like a hospital a couple days ago, and like I just walked around, and I didn't see. It was just mostly white people, to say the least. That was pretty much it. A lot of the nurses were white females. Not a lot of males nurses. And okay, I don't want to go into this because it's yeah. Is there another question?
Is it depressing?
It's not depressing. I feel like I'm stating the obvious.
Well, it shouldn't be obvious. Like, it's, I think, an assumption that we sort of live with, but that the point of this is to change it.
Yeah,
yeah. And the other one is in maybe 30 seconds or less, any takeaways?
All of it was covered.
Okay. You can save any takeaways also for the end of the session. So let's go ahead and have Dr. Dr. Anghad Singh introduce himself and take it away.
Thanks, Ellie. I've been marveling at the richness of this group. And
Yeah, isn't it great?
how lucky you are to have such a wonderful set of folks who are so insightful. I wish the doctors I worked with were quite as insightful as the folks here, I suppose. I will tell the group that I owe a large debt of gratitude to Dr. Thomas. Dr. Thomas may not realize it, but he's had a pretty big impact in my life. And we met because we interviewed together, and we had a very insightful conversation after I interviewed that really opened my my perspective to what diversity in medicine really looks like. And there were many things I understood, but he made some excellent points. So I'm jealous that you get to spend this much time with Dr. Thomas on a regular basis, and he's really a wizard of wisdom. I can't tell you all enough how much I as a colleague, as a physician colleague, have appreciated him. And if you haven't taken a moment to type out your appreciation in the chat, this might be a time for you to write out a word or two of appreciation for Dr. Thomas, of what he's meant to you as a part of this program, because often that's the last person who gets to hear your appreciation, because they tell you to tell me feedback about everybody else, but not themselves. So take a minute in the chat and please type kind of what Dr. Thomas has meant to you throughout this process, and make it short, make it long. But that's an important part, that gratitude and appreciation is not enough in medicine. And that's one thing we want to make sure we have. Yes, I'm in the office. That is in fact my background. I appreciate that somebody else watches The Office. I heard a couple themes in what I talked about. My goal is really to be fairly informal, because I think slide decks make people less approachable. And I have some slides, and we'll go through some slides because there's some detail we have to cover. But really, there's two parts of the healthcare journey if you want to go into any type of health field. One is the emotional and mental, and one is the technical. Right? So the emotional is, why do I want to do this? What motivates me? What inspires me? What's the thing that I want to do to make the world a better place? How can I live in the world that I hope, how can I be a part of the world that I hope to create for others? And the technical part is, how do I actually do that? How do I apply to medical school? How do I play the journey of going to medical school and residency and fellowship and getting a job and doing that? And how do I learn the skills of knowing all the words you have to learn and all the concepts you have to learn and all the biology and all of this, right? So that's the technical. And it's easy whenever we talk about medical school admissions to focus on the technical. It's really easy to talk about, first you do this, then you take the MCAT, then you got to get this GPA, you got to shadow this many hours, you got to do this, and you almost can create a formula. And I'm going to tell you, this is my 5th year on the admissions committee at the University of Washington. This is my 2nd year on the executive admissions committee, which I'll tell you about in a second. There's no formula. There are themes that you have to kind of work towards, but there's no formula. You can become a doctor at the University of Washington with 0 hours of shadowing. To most people, they go, "Ooh, I have 1,000 hours of shadowing. I got 100 hours of shadowing. I got 5 hours." And they kind of brag about how much shadowing they did. And I'm telling you right now that you can become a doctor with 0 hours of shadowing. That doesn't mean that there's not a skill you learn while shadowing, but the act of shadowing is not the act we care about. It's the thought behind the shadowing, what you learn out of shadowing, that we care about. So I heard a few themes from you all. I heard things like, I'm a non-traditional student. Heard that from Lydia. Lydia, if you're on, or maybe somebody else who feels comfortable too. I would love people to define for me what they'd say when they say non-traditional. What do they mean?
Usually when I say non-traditional, I mean somebody that hasn't had like a straightforward path, from high school to get their undergrad and then straight into medical school.
Okay. Anyone else have a different sort of approach or different thought about non-traditional for them? Somebody maybe who identifies as non-traditional or hears that word?
Yeah, I was going to add to that too. I also graduated a few years ago, and I have an engineering background.
Okay.
And I was in aviation, or am currently in aviation. So it's just a very different path that I took out of college. And so that's always something I'm nervous about when thinking about applications.
Okay. Who else?
I said I identified as a non-traditional student, but the way that I am a non-traditional student is after high school, I was in the Army for 8 years,
Okay.
and then I did college. So I'm a 28-year-old rising sophomore.
Go you. Okay. Anyone else want to share either their own identity, or if you don't feel like sharing that, you know, how you might think about non-traditional? I heard something about foreign medical or international medical. Michaela, I'm looking at you.
Yes, so I'm in my senior year here, so I've done all my coursework in the US, but I don't have a US citizenship or like a permanent residency, so I'm here with a student visa.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. I will share that in my medical school class, the oldest person who started medical school was 50 years old. When my brother started medical school, so my brother and I are the only doctors. My dad's now a doctor, mom's now a doctor. We had no doctors above my generation in the family. I'll tell you more about that. I had an uncle whose story I will share with you. But my only mentor was really my brother. And Dr. Thomas, I want you to read these chats. They're incredible. I want you to take the time and read them. His oldest classmate starting medical school is 55 years old. The average age, and I say average, right? That means there's a lot below, but a lot above, is something in the order of 25 or 26 to start medical school. And so the first thing I will say is that every one of your definitions of non-traditional is not non-traditional to me. To me, I want my doctor to be super interesting. I want my doctor to have a worldly experience. I want my doctor to understand what it means to experience different things in life. I want my doctor to have met a lot of different people. I want my doctor to have had to face a challenge in their life, they had to think about, overcome. I want my doctor to meet real people and to have explored outside of their comfort zone. I heard engineering. I have so many colleagues who did engineering as an undergrad. One of my classmates in medical school was a former professional chef. Another one was an investment banker. You go down the line, people who did a law degree before they came, people who did public health before they came, people who lived in South America teaching English for a few years, people who lived in East Asia, people who lived in other parts of the world, people who never left their kind of close bubble and stayed within their family and stayed in that small area. What you define as non-traditional is because you feel that's non-traditional, but let me tell you from our end, that is not non-traditional. That is in fact just medicine. I don't know, Dr. Thomas, would you agree?
Absolutely. Our medical school class was so interesting. People had done so many different things, and nothing, like he said, nothing that you consider non-traditional is.
Yeah. So one of the things we're going to work on with you all is positive self-talk. I hear a lot of, I didn't think I could, I don't think I can, I'm not sure if I'm good enough. I look at others and I look how many hours of shadowing they did and how much they did this. And I'm going to tell you, you got to throw that all out the window. Because every chip on your shoulder, every non-traditional aspect to you will make you stand out compared to the person next to you. The more boring you are and the more kind of formulaic you are, the less you're going to stand out from the crowd. So if you've experienced something that is not, what you consider traditional, don't worry. That means somebody will remember you a little bit more. Look at me. I wear a turban on my head. You said I walk in a room and nobody looks like me. Shit, that's literally my day-to-day experience, right? I'm the only turban doctor in the entire Western Washington region that I know. I have not yet met another one. I know people who are of the same, cultural background, religious background, but I have not met a person who wears a turban and keeps a long beard. And so in that regard, people remember me. So when I do a really good job of something, you're damn well sure they're going to remember that I was the one that did it. Now, if I do a subpar job, yeah, they're going to remember that too. So that just means I hold myself to a higher standard, but I utilize that for me as a positive because I know that I won't be forgotten when I impress somebody. And so every part of your identity you feel makes you different. That might be the high school and college voice talking. But let me tell you about the doctor voice, which is that's the things that I think makes people interesting. And so I'll start with that because I wanted to really talk about what it means to be in this journey. And it's, Aaliyah, when you were gone, we talked about there's an emotional mental piece and a technical piece. The emotional mental being, why do I want to do this? What inspires me? What's the world I want to live in? And how can I make an impact? And the technical is, how do I get through the technical process, going to school, going to fellowship, going to residency, learning the language of medicine, learning how to figure out diagnoses and doing, hands-on skills. That all is different. The core of what you need to master is the emotional of why. And once you get past that, the technical parts, nothing can stop you. And you might take longer than you want, and you might take longer than that person next to you. But at the end of the day, what do they call the person who got last place in the medical school class? Can anyone tell me?
Doctor?
Doctor.
Exactly. Right? They'll call you doctor, whether you graduated from the best school, whether you graduated from a school that you perhaps didn't want to necessarily go to. At the end of the day, if your goal is to take care of patients, then don't let the journey define you. You get to define the journey. And at the end of the day, there may be hiccups that you experience, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, you're still doctor, or whatever sort of part of healthcare you want to be a part of. So, all right, in the chat. So Dr. Thomas, I hope you got enough good wishes to carry you for some time. If anyone here in this group is savvy and can copy this into a Word document and email it to him so that he can keep it, please do that. I'm shameless, okay? I want people in the chat to tell me, what are 1 to 3 areas of medicine that interest you? And I'm going to keep it vague intentionally. I'm not telling you specialties. I'm not saying professions. I'm telling you in healthcare, in medicine, what are 1 to 3 areas that you find interesting? Okay. Research, great. Jimon, I'm just going to have you speak up. Tell me, what about research interests you? I'm going to just call people out a little bit because I think conversation is what's amazing about this group.
I think research is interesting because it feels very it's all about innovation and it's new and different. I got the opportunity to be in research at my college and currently am, and it's just, I feel like every day is exciting because I'm doing something new and different, and it feels like I'm always learning. It's I'm never not learning something new. And it's just so cool seeing all that.
That's exactly it. You have a question and you have to figure out a process to try to answer that question. That's research at its core. And if it's a question you find interesting, you'll enjoy the process. If it's a question you don't find interesting, you may not enjoy it. And so do the things that you find interesting. All right, so medicine makes you feel better. All right, let's talk about kind of, as we start doing this chat, thinking about, I heard people say primary care interests them. I saw international medicine interests them. I heard hospitalist, I heard nocturnist. I too, I guess, would like to work 1 week on, 2 weeks off. Pediatrician, so working with kids, international work and advocacy. Michaela, tell me more what that means to you.
I think what I really enjoy about medicine is that it's so universal, and if you become a doctor, wherever you go, you're going to be helpful and you're going to be able to help people. So I think that's just very interesting from medicine in general. And then advocacy, I think from this program and from the things that I'm involved in college and I was involved in high school, and why I came to the US is just trying to advocate for people that cannot for themselves, especially patients.
Yeah. When I was thinking of medicine, I was actually really resistant to the idea of medicine because I was thinking to myself that medicine would define me. And I think I heard that from this group saying, if I do doctor, I'm just going to be a doctor. That's all I'm going to be. And doctors love talking about being doctors, and that's all they do and talk about. But what actually made me think about medicine is I got to do doctor and, right? You're a doctor and what else you do, and healthcare is a profession that gets you the education, the connections, the experience, the financial security to do anything you really want in addition to being a doctor. You can be a doctor. I'll tell you this, one of my co-residents, he is routinely on MSNBC, CNN, you pick your TV channel of choice. He went to Columbia to do medical journalism, and he has a Twitter, he has an Instagram, he does all these silly videos, he has a podcast, he goes on TV, and to the point where one of my friends who is pre-med said, you know who my favorite doctor influencers are? It's blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, him? Oh yeah, he's fine. You know, because people around you, they're just human and we sort of put them on this pedestal, but you can do so many things. I have friends of mine that went and did investing. They're financial investing people and they invest in healthcare companies, but they're also doctors. I have people who are CEOs of companies and they're also doctors. People who write books and are authors, people who do legislation and try to work in advocacy to go to people and make difference on Capitol Hill. People who, you know, like I do things outside of being a doctor too, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the point is that I believe that medicine is a beautiful profession because medicine doesn't require you to just choose medicine alone. You can choose to do medicine and you can choose to do other things with it, and they're not mutually exclusive. Any thoughts you wanted to add about that, Ali?
I'll just say for me, it was being a doctor and an advocate. I thought of myself as going into medicine to become a physician activist. And I said, I'm not going to be just a doctor. I'm going to also do traditional medicine and public health. And, you know, so it was definitely part of my journey too. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I have a person that I mentor who she's finished her first year of community college. And I had my first chat with her and she said, I'm thinking of going into nursing. And I said, okay, great. Tell me more about why nursing. And what it came out was that she had been told by everyone around her that you're not smart enough to be a doctor. And that and then she also said to me that my family, my mom is not alive, my brother is not alive, my dad works an hourly job, and I can't wait that long to put a burden on him in order to, you know, if I want to go to a doctor, that's too many years, he can't afford that. And we talked a lot about that, and ultimately she worked hard, got herself a scholarship. But we talked about that one of the things that medicine really allowed her to do was to break that cycle of poverty that her family had been experiencing for years, and to break the cycles of the poor outcomes that her family was being forced to experience because of the sort of surroundings that she had to sort of experience when she was growing up. And so for her, medicine was a way to sort of, from a place of strength, that she was able to try to work towards that. So I share these different stories of people I know, of people I'm around, because different people will resonate with different things. And I'd like to share that with each of you in case it resonates with you as well. And as you can tell, I haven't talked a single second about the MCAT yet. I haven't talked about GPAs yet, right? Because that's the technical part. That's the part that, yeah, you check the box, you figure it out, we come up with a game plan, but the emotional part of why and what inspires you is really what's going to drive you through the lows, to drive you through the times where you feel like it's hard, when you're feeling like you're down, when the people around you are more competitive than you. Otherwise, you're sort of going to get so focused on the journey, you'll forget who you are, then you'll get lost and you'll feel disheartened. All right. Hey, I appreciate all these amazing comments. Challenge, problem solving, innovation, her dentistry, helping my community, low income and Latinx. I read your awesome comment, Lydia, around poor health outcomes for Black and Brown communities, using policy, clinical research. These are definitely all of the things that I want you to not forget. Because that is the piece that we want to foster. All right, let me share a little bit about my journey and what I do, and then I'll maybe do a little bit of slide decking, and then we'll come back to more conversation, and then we can kind of go from there. Does it sound like a plan? Okay. So I am a family physician. I grew up in Michigan. My parents moved to Canada as immigrants. My dad and mom were in India. They came to Canada before I was born. I was born in Canada. I moved to the US when I was 3 months old. I mentioned my dad was an engineer. He came to Canada with 20 bucks in his pocket and a scholarship to study, and then worked 2 jobs in order to sustain his studying. And when his colleague found out that he was working, he was in jeopardy of losing his scholarship. And he was 6 months away from finishing his PhD, and he decided that his family was more important than finishing his PhD. He left his scholarship and basically started working so that he could just spend time with me and my brother. So needless to say, education was important, family was important in the family that I grew up in, and people were willing to sacrifice whatever it took to have kind of a happy, loving family. My dad was an engineer. My uncle, his brother, was a physician, but he was a person who had polio as a young child. For those of you who don't know what polio is, it's probably because polio doesn't really exist in most of the world anymore. It's an infection that you can get when you're a young child oftentimes, and it causes paralysis in certain parts of your muscles where your muscles get weak, and you can have temporary and perhaps even permanent paralysis. And what the paralysis that it can cause is make problems for you to stop breathing. And so if your lung muscles don't work, your chest muscles don't work, then you can basically not survive from polio. So my uncle had polio as a young child. He was 4 or 5 when he got it. He was in a full body cast. So they basically, to prevent your body from getting weak, they put you in a full body, kind of a cast, like you break your arm, but like literally head to toe, except for your head and your hands and your feet, for a few years. And he was basically kept in a hospital bed for a couple of years in a row and barely survived. And when he became eligible to go to school, everyone around him said, look, you've had a hard life, just go to school, any school, just pick any job, just take it easy. You've had a hard enough life. And he said, no, I'm going to be a doctor. And the question is why? And he said, because I want to help the people that helped me. I want to serve others. And I grew up in a family, and I didn't realize this, right? So I was in the United States. My uncle was in India. I was too young to realize this. So as I got older, I reflected on this a lot. So this is kind of what inspired me to kind of think about medicine. So that's why I'm sharing this story. And what he did was he was a professor during the day of pathology at the local medical school that he was in. He went through medical school, became a doctor, and was a pathologist. So he looked at specimens and things like that. And he opened up a free clinic in the back of their house. And people would walk from, down the street to a few hours away, a few days a week, and would be like, hey, we want to see the doctor. And he would spend clinic for free, a few hours every kind of a few days a week, all 100% funded out of his own pocket, and refused to accept a single anything. Now, that's a pretty extraordinary story. And I'm not saying that everyone has that type of story, but what it inspired in me was to say that even when you could be selfish and say, I struggled so much, I need to do everything for me. Even in that sort of mentality, he said, no, I wanted to serve others. And that to me was that quintessential physician mentality, which is the people you see in COVID who say, I'm going to go to work, even if that means there's a chance that I might suffer, that I might die, but I'm going to do the thing because I believe serving others is what drives me to be a doctor. And that irrespective of who you are, where you come from, what your beliefs are, even if you don't get vaccinated and I don't agree with you, I will still take care of you because we're still human at the end of the day. And so that mentality really kind of spoke to me. I heard people talk about being able to apply your skills anywhere. I had a couple scenarios where people were kind of got sick and a doctor responded, and I was kind of even more inspired to say, I can apply my skills anywhere I go at any time. So I went to undergrad at Michigan. I worked really hard in high school, got good grades, went to University of Michigan for undergraduate, worked really hard, and then got into University of Michigan Medical School, and then came out to University of Washington in Seattle for finishing my family medicine training. So I did 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, and I did 3 years of family medicine residency. As I was in residency, I realized that I didn't want to see patients all the time. I felt inspired to do more than to see patients 5 days a week. And I learned there was a field called informatics, which is basically healthcare technology. And I realized the power that it would have, that if I helped people improve the technology, that it would help others be better doctors. And so I became inspired by this. I didn't learn about this field's existence until I became very far in my training. And eventually right time, right place. I believe if you work hard and you put yourself in positions to succeed, that you have a chance of succeeding. But if you don't even try, you won't even get that chance. I worked hard and I got put in a position where I was able to get a job at the University of Washington, where I got to do healthcare technology work for about half of the time, and about the other half of the time I got to see patients. It was a great gig. And I realized over time that I was very good at the healthcare technology part in healthcare. And so started doing that more and more, found it really fun, really gratifying. I got to be the doctor's doctor, if you will. And now I kind of have a leadership position within that at the university. And so I see patients in the urgent care, so walk-in clinics at the university, and I also do healthcare technology work at the university as well. I had no idea I was going to do that. And so again, when I talk to you about what inspires you, I was inspired by language disparities. My grandparents lived with us for part of the time. They had no insurance. They spoke English, but they really spoke Punjabi a lot more. And so I often served as sort of their ally in the hospitals, ally in the clinic, and had to sort of be a cultural navigator for them. And so that mentality inspired me and kept me going throughout all my medical training. Even now in healthcare technology, I think about things like, how can I make sure somebody like my grandparents can access technology? Not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody's comfortable with that. But I look at my 94-year-old grandfather who has WhatsApp, and he sends me WhatsApp forwards all the time. For those of you who use WhatsApp and have family in other countries, you are probably laughing right now because you know this. But this sort of experience of how can you make healthcare technology accessible for all, that thread is still driven by the original things that inspired me when I was in the early pre-med days. And so don't lose that, because that's not something that you want to lose throughout this process. So that's more or less my journey. Ellie, can you let me share my screen, please? All right, let's see. Excellent, there we go. All right, so you can see I now have a fancy title at the University of Washington, right? So I serve as an assistant chief medical information officer for the entire system. And basically I help doctors and other healthcare professionals in all of the clinics across the entire university see patients and do better at it. So it's kind of a fun job, and it's very accessible, and there's not enough diversity in it. I heard somebody say the hospitals felt really white. If you feel that's white, come to healthcare technology in Seattle and you'll feel even worse. So we need you all to be part of the future as well, okay? All right. We've talked about this a bunch, right? What inspires you? But the question that I went to my pre-med advisor, she was this wonderful woman, wonderful Black woman who said to me, Anghad, what's your mission? And I looked at her like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And she said, what's your mission? And I said, what do you mean? She said, what impact do you want to make in the world? What drives you, right? And what she made me do was every one of my activities, every one of the things I wrote in my application, everything I chose to do, you wanted to strengthen the case that your mission is to do blank. If your mission is to help reduce healthcare disparities and to understand the needs of brown and Black communities, then prove it to me. Are you doing volunteering to do that? Are you doing advocacy work? Are you trying to shadow doctors who have experience with that? Are you trying to work with doctors? Are you trying to research in that area? Are you doing extracurriculars or volunteer opportunities that have something to do with that? You know, tell me how you're doing that. And so she made me realize that whatever cohesive kind of elevator pitch, you know, in business, they say elevator pitch, which is what can you say to somebody between the time you get in the elevator to the time you leave the elevator in that 20, 30 seconds. If I had to explain myself in 20 seconds, how would you explain it? And if you gave somebody a resume or your application, would all that stuff support that? So what's your mission? Figure out all the things you told me in the chat that drive you. If that's what it is, then figure out how you can put that on paper and do all the activities that further explain that that's what I'm interested in. First common question I get is, do grades matter? And the answer is yes. But it's more than you think it matters and less than you think it matters, right? So when I was a pre-med, the admissions director for the University of Michigan Medical School, I got a chance to listen to him speak to a group of pre-meds, and he said, grades are what get your foot in the door. If you don't have grades, you can have the most interesting activities in the world and you just won't be able to get there, because at the core, medical schools want to make sure you're not going to fail out of medical school. So they need to see some element of academic success that tells them, hey, when you come here, you're going to graduate on time and with with a reasonable amount of support, and that you're going to pass your board exams, because that's not the medical school's choice, that's a national requirement. And so having good enough grades is an important part. If you have a 2.5 GPA, yeah, maybe we need to think about having a couple gap years. Maybe we can think about trying doing a post-baccalaureate program, which is kind of additional courses to add some additional academic grades to your scores, so that people can see, look, I may not have done well in undergrad, but hey, I was first generation college student. I didn't have good mentors. I didn't have anyone else who could tell me how to study. My family member got sick, whatever reason. But now that I'm a few years older, I figured out how to study. I figured out what works for me, and I got these amazing grades. And so you can think about ways to get your grades to be better. But do grades matter? Yes, and that will get your foot in the door. I've seen people have not the best grades, but they have other compelling parts of their story that allows them to still get an interview, still get a medical school. So it's not the only thing, but it does matter. And if your grades are, I would say, below a 3.0, then that's a conversation that you need to be thinking about. That I'm not telling you don't go to medical school. I'm talking about, let's be strategic about how you get to medical school. And so if that's your scenario, it's okay. Just make sure you think about it. Next question I get is, does the MCAT matter, right? So it depends where you apply and what score you get, right? So on the bottom right, you'll see the MCAT is a total score of between 472 and 528. I have no clue who decided that was the scale that they wanted to have their scores on, but that is the scale. And you take the test, the scores are valid for 3 years, and you want to take the MCAT if you're applying, this year by September of this year, right? And so you basically want to try to take the MCAT after you've taken all your bio classes, your chemistry classes, and physics classes. So make sure you got all that exposure in school. And once you feel like you've got exposure to school, then you would want to take, if you're able to, take some kind of training or class to study for the MCAT, or get some really good books and a good practice set. But that's one thing you want to invest in, if at all possible. If it means saving, if that means trying to get some kind of help to get some of the support to do that, doing well in the MCAT will only be to your benefit. Now, at the university here, we know that, especially with COVID, taking the MCAT isn't always possible for a variety of reasons, which we won't define. And so at the UW, we are one of the only schools in the country, I think there's less than 5, that are not requiring the MCAT. We didn't require it last year, and we're not requiring it this year. So if somebody were to have good grades and they had otherwise a good application, we've had more than a few students get in last year who didn't have the MCAT. And we're not putting blame or asking you to define why, but we are saying that it's okay if you don't have the MCAT, but if you've taken it before, we'll look at that score. So it's, if you are able to do well in the MCAT, it'll open up your options across the country. And so I generally would say definitely try to take it if you're thinking about that pathway. But what else matters? Academic ability, we talked about. Do you have decent enough grades to show that you're academically successful? Do you have experiences that are consistent with your goals, that mission piece that we talked about? Do you understand why medicine, right? If you can answer one question, go up to your friend and say, hey, ask me a question. And I go, okay, what do you want me to ask you? Why do you want to be a doctor? Okay, hey, why do you want to be a doctor? And you have to sit there and explain to them, why do you want to be a doctor? And you sound awkward, you're not going to get a medical school. Why? Because you don't know, you haven't convinced yourself yet why you want to be a doctor. So now you got to convince your best friend why you want to be a doctor. And if they don't believe you, then you can't convince somebody like me. But if you can convince your best friend that you want to be a doctor, then you're probably one step closer to being a doctor. So having clear motivation, and you want to have people around you who know you, who can write a letter of recommendation for you. You have to have 3 letters of recommendation. So that means getting to know your professor. So if you feel shy, if you did particularly well in a class, the question you want to ask your professor is, hi, professor, blah, blah, blah. I'm applying to medical school and I really enjoyed your class and I learned a lot and I worked hard and I did pretty well in the class. Would you feel comfortable writing me a strong letter of recommendation? So the question, the key word here is strong. You don't want somebody who's going to be like, I just write you a letter. There's two kinds of letters that people write. And Ellie, you can tell me if you disagree, but I find that people who write one letter is, this person is amazing. Let me tell you all the ways this person is amazing. Then the second letter is, let me tell you why I'm amazing as a letter writer. And just the fact that I'm writing them a letter should tell you why this person is amazing. Right? So you have the head of a department, you have the professor, very famous person who writes it. And they go, let me tell you all about my accomplishments. And then, oh, by the way, Jessica's blah, 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 blah. But if somebody goes, Jessica, can you believe that she did 8 years of the military and she has all this experience and she's a sophomore, but you know what? She was one of the best students in my class and she's thoughtful and dedicated. And let me give you an example of when I saw her work in a group or the way she analyzed this topic for this class. That person really knows you and makes it less about them. That's the kind of person you want to find. So somebody who has senior work ethic. So that could be a club where you have a professor who works with your club, who's seen how hard you work. It could be a volunteer opportunity. It could be a doctor you've shadowed. It could be a doctor you've gotten to know. And so you want somebody who can speak to you, not about themselves. Okay? Your whole person matters. So when you all talked about the things that make you non-traditional, remember that's what makes you interesting. So domestic physician shadowing, what I don't want to see is that you don't see anything in the United States healthcare system, but you've gone to 5 countries abroad and you talk about how there's these poor people in other countries had all these terrible health experiences and you learned how these doctors did all these things for these poor people. We see that sometimes and we don't want to see that. What we want to see is that you understand how the United States healthcare system works. Who are the different players? The doctor works with the patient, but who are the people that the doctor works with? What are the types of challenges that doctors experience? Why are doctors feeling exhausted? Why do they feel burnt out? Why do they want to quit medicine? What makes it easy to be a doctor? What makes it fun? What inspires doctors? What makes it hard to be a doctor? If you can try to answer some of these questions about medicine, I don't need you to shadow a doctor. In fact, it's not required here because again, with COVID and other things, we don't want to force anyone to have to shadow and have to go out of their way or put themselves in harm's way to go shadow. Even if that meant setting up a meeting with a doctor, even if it's your own pediatrician that you used to see, or your own primary care doctor and just say, hey, can I pick your brain for an hour one day and just learn about your job and what inspires you to your work? Or if it's, can you understand how the healthcare system works? One simple question that I'll challenge you to say is, how does insurance work in the United States? How does healthcare insurance work in the United States? If you can explain how healthcare insurance works in the United States to me, and you can do it with any semblance of clarity, you probably understand healthcare because it's confusing enough of a topic that you will understand how the healthcare system really functions. So the shadowing part is really a vehicle to understand patients, the difficulties that patients experience. Hey, maybe your grandma has a difficult time with healthcare and you've had to go to the appointments with your grandma. That counts, right? You understand that patient voice. You understand patient needs. You understand that. And maybe you talk to a doctor and understand their perspective. So the shadowing part is great, but it's not the only thing. Community service, caring about others, serving others, thinking of beyond yourself and reflecting on why that's important. Patient contact or understanding the patient experience. Leadership really helps. So yeah, you didn't just go to the club meetings. You didn't just go to that organization's meeting. You said, I'm going to join this committee. And after a year of it, maybe I want to become on the board. And I'm going to try to be the person who gets vulnerable and tries to lead this organization in some way. So trying to show that you're not just a follower, but also a leader, because that's a skill that you'll learn in medicine, but it's helpful to practice that before you get to be a doctor. Research is great. I did 1 semester of research. I absolutely hated it. I quit and I didn't do it. So it's not required. You got to know what works for you. I did a lot of leadership stuff. I did community service stuff. I did some patient contact stuff and some shadowing stuff, but I didn't necessarily have research. Employment. We know that many people can't afford to just do all these clubs and not work. They have to support themselves, they have to support the family, they have to get through college. And so if employment is a part of that picture, that's okay. That doesn't make you non-traditional, it doesn't mean anything about it. If you can align your employment to have some touch point with the healthcare industry, great. If not, that's okay too. But we want to see your whole person, and don't be afraid to talk about how you had to work to get through college. That's okay. And hobbies, interests, and any activities that mean a lot to you. If you like collecting comic books and that's like your most important thing in your life and you go to comic conventions and you do that, that's great. We want you to be interesting. I don't want you to be boring and just a doctor, because when that pediatrics patient comes in and you know the latest, greatest comic book character, you're going to be the best doctor that patient could ever have. And so being interesting and having hobbies and activities is important. So here's some of the requirements, right? This is the part where people get really tripped up. And my presentation is short. I just have a couple more slides because again, I wanted to talk to you all. So you have to take some social sciences or humanities classes. That can be like English classes. That can be things talking about philosophy and other things. You have to take some amount of chemistry, some amount of biology, some amount of physics. Those are, again, the 3 topics that the MCAT loves to talk about. So it's to your benefit to take them if you're going to take the MCAT. And then you can take classes like ethics and anatomy and human physiology. So I literally copied this from the UW website. Again, those give you a more rich understanding of medicine and biology, but by no means would I say that I've necessarily went out of my way to look about anatomy. But if in the interview somebody goes, would you rather say person X or person Y and why? And you were able to think about it and think through that difficult question because you took an ethics class where you had to think about that. That'll prepare you to have a more holistic approach to interviews and the world and conversations with people. So they help you, but by no means are required. The required ones are some of the humanities classes, chemistry, biology, and physics. Here is the application process. So you did a great job. You took all these classes. You got pretty good scores. Okay, you found people to write you letters of recommendation. You feel pretty solid. Now it's time to apply. What do you do? So you want to take your MCAT, and then there's an application that they call AMCAS. Probably something fancy that I don't know the letters of off the top of my head. So there's an application. It's a digital applications website, and they make you write things like a personal statement. If you've never had to write a personal statement, it's cool. I literally had no idea what a personal statement was until I went to medical school. And they basically say, here's a blank piece of paper and tell us why you want to be a doctor without telling us, I want to be a doctor because. So you have to talk about what are the experiences that inspired you to think about medicine and what kind of patients did you see and what, oh, I did this volunteering and that further made me interested in this. So if you had to boil that down, it's kind of like, what's your mission and why? And tell me all the things that first piqued your interest, inspired you to continue doing it, and then what solidified your decision that medicine is right for me? And what's the world that you want to see by being a doctor? What impact could you make as a doctor? So the application talks about that. You talk about what are the 10 or 15 experiences that you've done. I was a member of this club. I worked at the soup kitchen for a couple of months. I did this research project. I won this award. I took care of my family member because they were sick, and that happens. I did that on my application. I had a close family member that was very sick. So one of my points in my application was that I took care of them as a caregiver. And so I didn't get into the details of that, but I did talk about that because that was part of myself and my whole self. And so it talks about your experiences, it talks about a personal statement, you submit your grades, and then you send it off. And you basically send one application to all these medical schools. And you just click, 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 click. At least this is for the MD medical schools. I think there might be a different process for some of the DO programs and certainly for some of the international programs. But the MD, you basically say, I'm going to just check off. And it's kind of tempting because you just check all these boxes and you look at the end and it's like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But you kind of click all these boxes and then you send the same application out to everybody. Some schools will do a pre-screen where they go, do you have a minimum GPA for our requirements? Okay, great. Do you have a minimum MCAT score? Great. If you don't, sorry, please try again. If you do, then you get to round 2. Round 2, you do something called a secondary application. Yeah, I think you're right. Some of the states like Texas has a different one. I think you're absolutely right. AMCAS is the most common one though. And then your secondary application will tell you like things more about yourself. Some places will be like, write a paragraph that's like an autobiography about yourself. Or if you had to, what's your most meaningful experience and tell us why? Or if you had to, tell somebody something. And essentially, it's kind of like the questions you get for applying to college around some of those, interesting secondary sort of like just thinking questions sometimes I'll do. And then you submit your letters of recommendation and you have to submit that. And there are some fees that come with that too. So that is a real thing that if you, that this can be an expensive process, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And then let's say you hop to the first cycle, you get through the second cycle, and then I go, great, we like you. Then you go for an interview because we don't want to see that you're good enough on paper. We've had plenty of people who sound awesome on paper, and then you meet them and you go, oh my God, I would never want that person to be my doctor. And then you meet some people who do pretty good on paper. You meet them, you're like, oh my God, this person is incredible. Please let them in right now. Don't let them go anywhere. Don't let them leave the room. I want them in this medical school today. And so the interview really is where we get to understand you, we get to meet you, we get to have you talk to us about your experiences. And so you generally do one kind of interview day with any medical school that invites you. And then at some point, the admissions committees meet. And so the XCOM is the executive committee. That's our shorthand for us at UW. Every school has their own shorthand, but at UW, that's our shorthand, XCOM. And we meet and we get all the feedback from the interviewers, we get the feedback from the application reviewers, and then we basically decide who gets in and who doesn't. And then for those that don't get in, we usually put them on the wait list. And then basically by around the time of May, people find out if they got into medical school or not. And at the end of the day, you pick one medical school and then you give a deposit and then you become a doctor, or rather you start medical school on your journey to becoming a doctor. So the emotional part I talked about earlier is the hard part. The technical part, if you are driven and motivated, you're going to be inspired to do really well in school. You're going to be inspired to seek out help. You're going to be inspired to find a counselor. You're going to be inspired to find a study group. You're going to be inspired to not be shy about asking for help because you don't care what it takes. You know what your goal is, and you're going to figure out whatever it takes to get to that goal. And the technical part is an application process, and you're going to want a mentor to walk you through this process, review your personal statement. Don't do it on your own, and make sure that you understand each of the parts as you jump through the hoops. I have one more slide and then we'll talk about questions because I know this is a pretty dense set of things. And it's really important to understand because I've had many applicants and people I know say, I don't think I can do it because it's too expensive. And there's no shame about this, but there are assistance programs that can help you, that will give you reduced MCAT fees, that will give you official guides to the MCAT. They'll help you with some of the med school admissions requirements, and they waive a lot of your AMCAS fees. And so if you're in a position where you're worried that the financial burden of applying to medical school would be a lot, if you apply to 220 medical schools, it sounds like it'll be $949 to apply to 20 medical schools. That's a lot of money. And so I say this because it's important for those where it applies to know that people, you might not have a mentor that tells you this. So it's important for me to tell you that it's okay. There are resources out there. And I never know if you get this help. So it's not like I'm ever going to judge you differently for it. In fact, I would applaud you if you were to say, you know what, I'm eligible for this and I'm doing this. And so just knowing that this kind of exists is important. So that is my kind of nuts and bolts technical slide deck. And I want to pause for questions. I'm going to stop sharing because I can see all your faces and kind of hear your reflections, hear your thoughts, hear your questions. You can just speak, Jessica. You don't need to raise your hand. I appreciate it.
Everyone needs to ask a question. You know how it is, guys. Get your questions ready. If someone else asks, ask it. Get another one.
Okay, so my question is, when you get an application, what do you and your team spend your most time looking at?
The first thing I go to, so as an executive admissions committee member, my job is to, along with all of my colleagues, to look at every single application that meets our bare minimum cutoff. We review each of those by hand and read those and then decide whether we push them to the next round or not. And so in that process, the first thing that I read is your personal statement in the application, because maybe you've kind of figured a thing or two out about me. I want to know what drives you, what motivates you, what's your story. once I understand your story, then I read the experiences. Yeah, we get 6,000 applications, 9,000 applications, something like that. I'll have to look up the stats from last year. It was an exorbitant number of applications. We had a lot last year in COVID especially. But I like to know what your experiences are. And then for me, I would look at your grades. Some people look at the grades in GPA and the MCAT score first, and then they'll look at the other parts. But for the most part, I like to know your story first. And then from there, I put your grades in context. So if you have a 2.5 in your freshman year, but then you end up with a 3.5, 3.8, in your senior year, as long as you're going up, I don't care. I've had people I've said, yeah, I want to interview that person, and their grades weren't the best. If your grades are at 3.5 every year, that's perfectly fine by me. I need to know that you're improving, that you're getting better, that you kind of are growing as a student. And you may not get it the first time, but that's okay. So that's kind of our general philosophy from what I can tell. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
All right, what else?
If I could ask, what are some common mistakes that you see in applications that sort of give you this red flag of, I don't think this person is a fit for this program?
Yeah, I think that if you don't reflect on why, so people tell me what they did. They're really good at being like note takers. I did this, I did that, then I did this, but they don't ever explain what impact did that have on me? What difference did it make? I did a volunteer program. Cool. But what did you learn from it? What did you expect to learn? How did your thinking shift? How did that reinforce your interest in being a doctor? And what new things did you gain out of it? So the ability to reflect on your experiences is really important, that a lot of people will miss, and they'll just tell me what they did. And I say, that's great, but I don't necessarily know anything more about you because of it.
I think coming from that, what are the common mistakes that you see on interviews? Like one time we heard from a doctor saying that when you get to the interview, they already like you. You just need to show that you're not going to be a bad doctor, essentially. So like, what are those red flags in interviews?
I'll let Dr. Thomas share as well, since he's been a co-interviewer with me. But I will echo the reflection part. People sometimes don't have a good sense of what the experience is meant to them, or why they believe a certain thing. They might have this regurgitated, rehearsed answer of why I want to be a doctor. But if I ask you more, like, hey, why do you want to do this thing? And tell me more about how this experience that you told me about, and then they can't really get into the details of it. That's hard. The other piece that I think is that people will come in with a very narrow understanding of medicine. And I think that it would be helpful for you all to have a wider understanding of medicine. So for example, you shadowed a couple doctors and you understand the patient-doctor experience pretty well, let's say, and you feel pretty good about that. But then I go something like, what would you do to make healthcare better? What is, one thing that the government could do to fix healthcare? What's the biggest problem in healthcare today? And you just go, I don't know, because you were so narrowly focused on the single doctor-patient relationship that you didn't think about the ecosystem that a doctor works in. So I would encourage you all to think about not just the patient-doctor relationship, but who are the different forces and people and entities that doctors have to work with when delivering care. When I send somebody, Dr. Thomas sends somebody home from the hospital and has to get somebody to go to a skilled nursing facility, there's so many, just that simple act of moving them from one facility to the other has so many different angles. There's insurance, there's transportation, there is kind of is the facility the right mix? Do they have the right nursing staff on board? And so thinking about what are some of the real problems and what are the different parts of healthcare that could potentially intersect with that you could maybe say, if we just change that, that might be a little bit better. I don't know, Dr. Thomas, what are some of your things you think about some of the challenges you see with applicants?
I think you really want to get a sense for whether people have genuine respect and love for people, or whether they are coming in because it's something that they can do because they're smart enough to do it. So, you know, a real genuine, I think that gets at the first point, you know, a deeply held rationale for pursuing medicine, but also I would just add a real humanistic perspective. I mean, medicine, I believe, should be peopled by people. That's a bad sentence. We should have, you know, individuals in healthcare who really do love interacting with people, and that's a genuine, deeply held feeling that is easy. That when you're burned out, you come to the door of the exam room, and at the end of the day, you will enjoy, you know, interacting with people. And I haven't done this nearly as long enough to really say. So keep asking Dr. Singh questions.
What else?
I was curious if you could share like your opinion or weigh in on applying earlier in the cycle and how detrimental it would be to apply later in the cycle.
I always tell people that it's to your best interest to generally apply early, but it's not the end of the world if you can't. You want to have a strong application. So if you wait a couple months, it's not the end of the world, but you want to you want to be organized, right? You want to show the medical schools, I'm an organized applicant and I've got my ducks in a row. So you want to make sure you've got your MCAT prepped and planned. Even if you don't take it the second things opened up, that's okay. You want to have your letters of recommendation tied up. You want to have your grades, transcripts planned, and you want to have your activities written. I don't want you starting your personal statement the day the application opens up. You should be thinking about that a couple months in advance, having at least 2 to 3 people review it, ideally somebody in medicine if you can. And it depends on the school. Some schools are rolling admissions and some schools aren't. So you'll just have to look at each school to find out if one's rolling or not. But it's generally to your best interest to get in early because you have less people for them to compare you against. But that's an excellent question. And there's no right answer. We let people in till the very last day. So it's not, there's a perfect solution. But if you want to be the best darn tootin' student you can, get in early.
I have a follow-up to that, I guess. Yeah. You were earlier in your presentation, you shared how it's also beneficial to have taken your MCAT prior to applying and making sure to take it after you're done with all of the prerequisites. So yeah. I was wondering, would you recommend applying if you haven't taken the MCAT yet and then submitting that score later in the process, or is it better to hold off and just turn in the whole package deal once that score is also available?
I probably would turn it. If I knew that I was definitely going to apply, I would probably turn it in. And that way I don't have to focus on anything else but the MCAT, right? So in the couple weeks so I took my MCAT after, so I went straight through. So I apologize to those who I asked about non-traditional. I was probably the most unnecessarily traditional person. I went straight through undergrad to medical school to residency to my job. And so I applied at the end of my junior year. So I applied at the end of my junior year and I took my MCAT May 31st of my junior year. At Michigan, our academic school year ended end of April. So I had the sun shining at me, so you have to apologize. This looks like a whitewashed person, like totally just sunned out. But I took my MCAT end of junior year, and I took an MCAT class that spanned from January to April, that met twice a week, and basically took a little bit less credits and took that as a kind of another class for myself. So I had more time to study along with my regular school. And the reason I like taking the MCAT before I apply is that I'm just sort of done. It just lingers otherwise. And you know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you have to make sure you save up your resources and save up your energies.
All right, thank you.
Of course. All right, what else?
If you have, let's say that you have like a pretty decent overall GPA, especially when it comes to social sciences, but maybe your core science GPA is a little lower, like under a 3.0. Like for me, my core science GPA was around a 2.65. I took a few classes at a community college to finish up my pre-med prereqs, and it came up a little bit. Would you say that having a higher MCAT score would help you balance that out?
My general recommendation to this group is if your GPA on either one of the core or the science is less than 3.0, I would advise you to probably take some additional coursework to bring that up. And the reason I'll tell you that is if I show you, let me see if I have a slide here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to show you a slide that's not meant to scare anybody, but it's meant to be honest and realistic, because we're going to be our authentic selves here, and we're going to be vulnerable, and we're going to share what's real. So this is 2020, University of Washington School of Medicine. On the left, you're going to see GPAs. On the top, you're going to see MCAT scores. And so the way you read this is you see 2 columns. One is accepted number of people. That's what ACC means. And TOTE means total number of applicants. That's right. This is the people that got accepted into medical school. Okay. So of the people who are students at the University of Washington School of Medicine, what was their metrics coming in? So you can see that if you have basically below a 3, so you're at 2.8, 2.99, you go across, you had very few accepted students. Maybe I'm reading this incorrectly. I'll have to look at this again, but I'm pretty sure this is that. The point, the general themes are pretty much accurate, which is below a 3.0, it doesn't really matter what your MCAT score is. But if your GPA is up, you can fall to lower MCAT scores and still be able to get into medical school. So your GPA probably ultimately will be more important than your MCAT score. But if you're below a 3, I really would think about things like additional classes, a master's program, or post-bac classes. If you really, because the GPA part will probably make a big difference for you in terms of this. And there are national data. So their GPA is, yes, the GPA is 2 parts. Your GPA is science GPA, and you have a total GPA. And so if your total GPA, oops, I sent that to just LE. If you can just type that out to the group. But if your overall GPA is 3.5, you're probably fine, right? So this is your total GPA. And if your science GPA is low, it's a case by case. You'll want to talk to an advisor about that piece. But it's important to indicate that your GPA does matter, but again, it's not the only thing that we care about. Okay. I don't mean to say that to scare you. It's not an intention to scare you at all. It's just trying to be an honest reflection of what the variables are that people look at.
Can I just ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys look at both the undergrad GPA and the core science GPA?
So undergrad GPA is split into overall GPA and science and math GPA, right, basically.
Okay.
And then you might go to post-college classes. You might do a master's program. You might do a post-bac program, a post-baccalaureate, which is kind of like medical prereqs for people who've been out of the school for too long. And that's kind of additional grades that we look at. And generally, schools will say, if your post-bac or your master's grades are pretty good, they tend to forgive a lot of the less than good grades in undergrad.
Okay, thank you.
All right, what else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So would you say that, because I know for medical and dental school, I know like in the first 2 years, it's like they take like similar classes, but I was just wondering, is the application and interview process like similar to each other, or is there like a difference?
I don't know if dental has interviews. Does anyone else? Do you know? I actually don't know.
Yeah, they do have interviews.
They probably look at the same general components. So here's what I tell people. If you are, even if you don't want to do medicine, nobody will ever fault you for doing all the prereqs for medicine, getting really good scores, and having really good extracurriculars, right? No job will care, no master's degree will care, no dental school, no nursing school, no public health school will care that you are just an amazing applicant, right? At the end of the day, if you do a good job of setting yourself for medical school, you will be a really good applicant for everything else. And so I bet you dental and medical are similar. I don't know for sure. If that's a particular interest to you, we could try to find somebody in the UW School of Dentistry to chat with. And so, you can reach out to Dr. Thomas and we can try to find somebody together. But take whatever I tell you and you can apply it to dental school because it'll probably be just fine. And I know at least 8 to 10 doctors in the region, dentists in the region, if we need to connect you with anybody who's practicing in dentistry.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
I had a question. So I know I just graduated high school, so I'm about to go to my freshman year. And I know high school is very different from college,
Yeah.
but in terms of getting recommendations of everything, how early would you suggest looking for those? Because I know in high school it was teachers were jam-packed with them and everyone was rushing mid of senior year.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
when would you suggest starting to get those?
So remember that not everybody in college needs letters of recommendation like people do in high school. So it's not the same intensity per se, and not every professor is going to get inundated. My letter writers were as a professor from my freshman year, a professor from my junior year. And it's really, if you did exceptionally well in a class, what I did is I emailed that professor and said, hey, can I just meet with you for coffee or come to your office hours one day and just learn about what you do in your work? And we started talking about, I didn't know what research was. He's telling me about protein research that he does and chemistry research. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then we started talking about the NBA and basketball and just kind of got to know each other over a couple of coffee sessions. And I did well in his class. He kind of got to know me a little bit. And then after we kind of had a relationship, I said, hey, would you feel comfortable writing me a letter of recommendation, a strong letter of recommendation? And he said, yeah, I would be happy to. And so my best recommendation to you is go to all the office hours you possibly can, because you want somebody to get to know you, not just your work. So it's a mixture of your performance and your person. And so that would be the best tip I can give people who are in college is go to office hours. They're free, extra teaching. And if not, just get to know somebody, especially if it's a professor you like and it's a topic you like and somebody you think you might want to get a letter from. If you go to office hours, they're way more likely to give you a letter of recommendation that's good and it's going to be well written and they're going to spend the time to do it.
That's very good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, what else?
Can I ask you, so earlier you were talking about leadership roles. So what if you try a leadership role for a year and then you realize it wasn't what was really interesting to you? And you just, so the next year you're not in that leadership role anymore or something like that. Does that look bad that you didn't stick through with an experience or?
No, you ideally want to have an experience or two where you stick with it, even if you're not necessarily a total leader in it. The question I would ask you is, why did you not feel like it was the right fit for you? And if you can articulate to me why you felt like it wasn't the right fit to do the next year, then that means that you've reflected on something for yourself, and that speaks a lot. And so, that I'm not looking to see if every single thing is one and done. Yeah, maybe that doesn't look as great. But if you have at least 2 years on some things and you have one thing you've done for a little while, then I think you're going to be perfectly fine. But if you just did, a leadership thing or two and it wasn't a good fit, no, I wouldn't stress about it at all. All right, what else?
I have a question also.
Yeah, what's up?
So if the GPA kind of messed up because of family, problem or difficult, something like that, would it be considered, when you show me when you show us the GPA and the MCAT score and how you guys accept or not, would that be affected because of, I guess you said that you'll be reading the personal assessment first and then see the MCAT and then the GPA. But if someone is checking the GPA and then the MCAT first and then not reading this personal assessment, it would be hard to make a decision, right? So how do you
is it going to be considered in the consideration that like, oh, it's okay to take this, kind of.
Right. So remember, it's a holistic review that we do. So we look at all parts of your person. So your GPA, whether we like it or not, is going to be considered. Your experiences are going to be considered. And if you feel comfortable sharing the challenges that you've experienced, because we all have different challenges in our life, then that would be considered too. I've interviewed applicants who had GPAs of 2.8, but they had other parts of the application which were much stronger. They had a compelling story. They had a lot of amazing experiences. They had some reason to explain why they had a 2.8. But in general, it's going to be a little bit harder, to be honest. That's just a part of the system that I've seen. And so would anybody fault you for applying? No, but you have to make sure that if other parts aren't stronger, that would really make up for the GPA, then you may want to reconsider your strategy of applying to medical school. I'm not telling you not to apply, just how and when you choose to apply. All right, what else?
I have another question. You kind of touched on this before, but for someone who has been out of college for a few years, I couldn't find direct information on UW for how long the prerequisite courses and requirements are valid for.
Yeah, I'll have to double check. I think it's somewhere in the family of 3 to 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know if it's a UW thing or it's and you can look up AMCAS and then like how long are prereqs valid, and you'll probably find it. I'll try to see if I can find it as well while we are on this, because I don't think it's necessarily school by school. I think it's a application piece. I'll try to find out for you in the meantime.
Okay, I'll look on AMCAS as well. I had to look in their help manual, but I might have missed it. So
Yeah, I'll try to find it too. All right, what else?
How would a pre-med or an aspiring applicant know that they are ready to apply to medical schools?
Man, it's the hardest question I've gotten today. Two things. One is you have to make sure you check all the boxes. Once you take your MCAT, it's valid for 3 years. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to apply in the next 3 years. And then it's a bit of a gut check, right? Once you get on the train, it's hard to get off. Once you get to medical school, don't get me wrong, it's not that you can't. I have many colleagues that took a year off in medical school. In fact, about 1/3 of my medical school class took a year off before they graduated medical school. Okay, so I'm not saying that you can't take pauses in the journey. Once you get on the train, it's a little bit hard to get off. And so if you've convinced your best friend that you want to go to medical school because you had them ask you that question, if you've got your courses done, if you've got your MCAT ready, if you've got your letters of recommendation in place, and if you started working on the application, or you think that you'd be down to work on that, you're probably ready. If you can't convince your best friend that you want to go to medical school, you're definitely not ready. So that's like my first bar. And then in terms of when to apply, it depends on a couple of things, and probably depends on more your personal life, your family obligations, and whether you're going to be able to, basically be ready for it. And if your family has other needs or other, things that you need to help them with. But most people I know, it's a kind of a gut feeling that's hard to explain. And you're just like going up a long hike and you're like, you know what, I'm ready to go climb that mountain. And I can't tell you what the best day to start is, but the best day is today, and tomorrow will be better, and the day after that will be better than that. And so at some point you just kind of commit and you just go all in. I don't know, Ali, what do you think? I mean, I think that's a really hard question. It looks like he's kind of on the same page, but
Try to throw in some questions in the chats for just previews for people.
Great, and I'll make sure I'm trying to be succinct. What range of number of schools to which one should you apply? Is it based on your overall competitiveness and what you can afford? Yeah, kind of like applying to college for some people, they create kind of, you look at, there's like kind of metrics you can look at. So often a first place people start is like, what are the kind of GPA metrics that schools are looking for? What's the general MCAT scores they're looking for? If you're applying to Harvard, you're gonna have a different level of minimum score. For applying to a place that is perhaps, rural, I don't know, Wisconsin or rural Missouri, where it's less attractive and less kind of research money going there, perhaps they're gonna accept a different profile of student. So you first look at kind of where your scores are, what you're looking at. Then you look at what the different programs will offer. So what interests you? Does that program have the community you want to serve in an ideal world? So if I go to rural Wisconsin, but I want to work with, refugee immigrants, is that community represented there, or is it not represented there? And so thinking a little bit about that. I'll say that in general, the philosophy here about med school is just get in and don't worry about where you go, because at the end of the day, you'll figure it out. And apply broadly and think about what are your dream schools, what are your reach schools, what are your likely schools, and what are some of the schools where you think you just have a good shot of getting in. And if you're on the fence where you're kind of lower grade, lower GPA, then thinking about being diverse in your offerings. So DO programs have generally more tiers of schools. So they tend to have schools that allow for lower GPAs, lower MCATs, if that's something you're worried about. The things that I heard here, like my family is here, that's what's important to me. Is it okay if you move away from your family for 4 years? Would that be okay? Would that be a huge issue for you all? And so thinking a little bit about that, I applied to probably 15 to 20 schools myself, to be honest, because I just wanted the best chance I could possibly have. And the way that med school admissions works is it costs a lot of money to apply to the first school, and then like every school after that, it's like 20, 30 bucks. And so it's kind of tempting to be like, oh, it's just 20, 30 more bucks more. Oh, it's just 20, 30 more bucks more. But for me, I didn't know where I would get in. I didn't know really for sure where I was in terms of competitiveness. So I applied to a diverse range. And I got about, 25% of them gave me an interview, because I had applied to some schools that I thought I was highly likely to get into, and some schools where I thought it was a bit of a stretch, and I didn't necessarily get interviews there. If my GPA is low and I've graduated, does it make a difference if I do a formal postbac? They're often expensive and not many an informal postbac. Taking classes in community college or a master's is the last choice more competitive. So whether you do a master's or not, honestly, it depends on if your classes if they're not valid anymore, you're probably, you can probably get away with anything, but I've seen the most success of people who go to formal postbacs. I appreciate they're expensive. I appreciate there are a lot of loans that you might take on. I appreciate it's a lot of work. You might travel somewhere else, but they generally have the coaching success, faculty, and other pieces to them that'll kind of make it easier for you to be successful. And so I like that. If that's not possible for any number of reasons, informal postbac would be fine. But remember that a school won't be as convinced that you're going to be academically successful if you're trying to compare community college level difficulty classes to a four-year university medical school classes. And if I go to a formal postbac and I go to a school that has more of a rigorous program to it and I do well there, it's more likely to convince the medical school that you've grown as a student and that you've figured things out and you know more. And so that's why I think if I had to really recommend something, I would take on the debt of going to a formal postbac. I'm going to close these blinds and I'm going to keep talking. I'm still here.
We're close on time too, so if this silence means that people are questioned out, we could segue into a wrap up. But let's see, any questions further, or how do you guys feel?
I do have another question.
Oh, okay. Start putting them in the chat so that we can kind of all put in a few more.
And I'll start typing in the chat too, Ali, whenever we're done. Do you want to move to your Delta, your cool activity you like to end meetings with? I can start answering in the chat as well. So I'll take this question, then we'll go there. All right, ready whenever you are, whoever that was.
I typed it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
It was just, will virtual interviews be continued?
For us, yes, 100% at UW right now. We feel that it's an equity issue, and so we have chosen to make virtual for the time being. That's not true of many other medical schools. So if we're trying to play the game of medical school admissions and trying to help you get in, it is a realistic fact that it is expensive to apply to medical school. And so there are opportunities for you to make it more doable, but a few places are still doing it, and I'm hoping to think that it should continue for the foreseeable future, but we'll see. All right, Ali, I'll turn it back to you. I'll throw some questions and answers in the chat and try to keep it going there.
Okay, so I'm going to have you guys, while we're closing up, let's share in the chat. There'll be a lot of traffic in the chat, but I can track it. What are some takeaways that you've had? Just put one or maybe two takeaways that you had from this session. And we'll take about 2 minutes for that. And since there'll be so much traffic again, I'll just get ready to scroll back. All right, so while you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask those who can to give us a delta about the whole program. So since we only have 5 minutes, we need to remember we're all family here. And one of the requirements of family is that you gotta help your loved ones see things that they don't. So as you're putting in takeaways, what are the blind spots that we need to know so that your younger siblings, when they come through, can have an even better experience.
Something I was going to
In the
say
chat
something.
as well. Sorry.
Oh, I can put it in the chat.
No,
Sorry.
no. You go ahead, but if you at the same time, people can put things in the chat and I'll call you. Sorry, please go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say our group talked about this last time, but there's a couple physicians that didn't really go too much into detail about their own path or like why they chose their specific field. I think in particular, I was really interested to hear more about the physician we had who was a primary care doctor and a